It's 1834. In the dead of night, within the gilded halls of the Royal Palace of Madrid, a royal physician is summoned for a task that will haunt him for the rest of his life. King Ferdinand VII is dead, but the physician's job is not a standard autopsy. He's been ordered to perform a bizarre and grotesque preservation, one that mirrors the twisted legacy of the man himself. This macabre final act was a fitting end for a king whose life was a spectacle of horror, a monarch so profoundly broken that he became known as the Cursed King. To understand the man, you have to look at the poison that ran through his veins long before he was ever born. Ferdinand VII was a product of the Spanish Bourbon dynasty, a royal family that had practiced inbreeding for centuries with a devotion that bordered on suicidal. For generations, they had married nieces, uncles, and first cousins, all to keep power and wealth locked within the family. But this genetic bottleneck came at a terrible price. By the time Ferdinand was born in 1784, the Bourbon bloodline was a cocktail of hereditary defects. This wasn't just bad luck, it was a self-inflicted wound that festered across generations, creating a lineage of rulers plagued by physical deformities and psychological instability. From the infamous Habsburg jaw to crippling intellectual disabilities, the Spanish royals were living proof that blue blood, when kept too pure, turns toxic. And Ferdinand was the culmination of this decay, a king whose body and mind were a battleground for the sins of his ancestors. His story isn't just about a bad king, it's about how a dynasty's obsession with purity created its own monster. Growing up in the Spanish court was a masterclass in dysfunction. Ferdinand's childhood was a toxic brew of neglect and humiliation. His father, King Charles IV, was a well-meaning but hopelessly weak ruler, more interested in hunting and clockmaking than in governing a global empire or raising a son. The real power behind the throne was Ferdinand's mother, Queen Maria Luisa. She was domineering, openly unfaithful to the king, and held her own son in thinly veiled contempt. The court was a snake pit of gossip, with whispers about the Queen's affair with the Prime Minister, Manuel Godoy, echoing through the palace corridors. For a young, insecure prince, it was a living nightmare. Ferdinand grew up convinced that everyone was laughing at him, mocking his parentage, his appearance, and his very right to exist. This constant public humiliation didn't make him stronger. It curdled into a deep-seated paranoia and a burning desire for revenge. He developed a profound sense of shame and social anxiety, which he masked with a chilling cruelty. The boy who felt powerless and ridiculed would grow into a man who wielded power like a weapon, trusting no one and lashing out at anyone he perceived as a threat. The twisted psychology of the future king was forged in the fires of his family's dysfunction. To secure the future of the Bourbon line, a marriage was arranged for the young Ferdinand. His bride was his first cousin, Princess Maria Antonia of Naples, another Bourbon. From a political standpoint, it made perfect sense, but from a human perspective, it was a catastrophe. The marriage wasn't just loveless, it was a battlefield. Ferdinand, already simmering with resentment and insecurity, treated his intelligent and spirited wife with suspicion and cruelty. He saw her as another pawn in the court's games, another person who might betray him. Their relationship quickly devolved into a cycle of abuse and trauma. Maria Antonia, trapped in a foreign court with a husband who despised her, fell into a deep depression. The pressure to produce an heir was immense, and it became Ferdinand's obsession. But Maria Antonia suffered 2 miscarriages, each one fueling Ferdinand's paranoia and rage. He saw the failed pregnancies not as a personal tragedy, but as a deliberate failure on her part, a betrayal. Her health, both physical and mental, collapsed under the strain. In 1806, after just 4 years of marriage, Maria Antonia died at the age of 21. The official cause was tuberculosis, but the timing was suspicious. Rumors immediately swirled that she had been poisoned, either by Queen Maria Luisa, who hated her, or perhaps even by Ferdinand himself. We'll likely never know the truth, but her death served as a dark omen for the betrayals that would define Ferdinand's path to power. Ferdinand's simmering resentment against his parents and their favorite, Prime Minister Godoy, finally boiled over in 1807. Convinced that Godoy was plotting to usurp his place as heir, Ferdinand entered into a secret alliance with a faction of disgruntled nobles. Together, they hatched the El Escorial conspiracy, a poorly planned coup to overthrow Godoy and force his father, Charles IV, to abdicate. But the plot was discovered before it could even begin. When confronted, Ferdinand's true character was laid bare. Faced with the consequences of his treason, he didn't stand by his allies. Instead, in a spectacular act of cowardice, he immediately confessed everything and threw his co-conspirators under the bus. Begging his father for forgiveness, he named every single person involved, saving his own skin by sacrificing theirs. It was a defining moment. This act of betrayal established a pattern that would repeat throughout his life: self-preservation at any cost. He learned that loyalty was a weakness and that treachery was a tool for survival. His father, ever the fool, forgave him. But the Spanish people who despised Godoy saw Ferdinand not as a traitor, but as a hero. They rallied behind the young prince, unknowingly cheering for the man who would one day become their tormentor. Just a few months later, history handed Ferdinand the keys to the kingdom in the most chaotic way imaginable. In 1808, Napoleon Bonaparte, seeing the Spanish royal family tearing itself apart, decided to intervene. He marched his armies into Spain under the guise of being an ally, but his true intention was conquest. The Spanish people, furious at Godoy for allowing French troops onto their soil, rioted. In the chaos, King Charles IV was finally forced to abdicate, and Ferdinand was proclaimed king. His moment of triumph, however, lasted about 5 minutes. Napoleon, the true puppet master, summoned both Ferdinand and his father to a meeting in France. Once there, he forced them both to renounce their claims to the Spanish throne and handed the crown to his own brother, Joseph Bonaparte. Just like that, Ferdinand went from being a king to a prisoner. He would spend the next 6 years under house arrest in a luxurious French chateau. This period of captivity was transformative. While his people were fighting and dying in a brutal war of independence against the French, a war waged in his name, Ferdinand was living a life of detached comfort. He was studied by French physicians who documented his strange behaviors and growing detachment from reality. Instead of worrying about the fate of his nation, Ferdinand's world shrank to his own personal obsessions and grievances. He wrote fawning letters to Napoleon, congratulating him on his victories over the Spanish armies and even begging the French emperor to adopt him. The man who the Spanish people called the Desired One was busy betraying them yet again, proving that his only true loyalty was to himself. This gilded cage would further warp his mind, ensuring that the king who eventually returned to Spain would be even more broken than the one who left. In the midst of this political turmoil, the court was consumed with a matter of dynastic survival. Ferdinand needed an heir. His first marriage had been childless and unhappy. So, in 1816, a second marriage was arranged. The bride was his own niece, Maria Isabel of Portugal. This union was a cold political calculation designed to secure the succession and strengthen ties between the Iberian monarchies. For Maria Isabel, arriving in the Spanish court was like stepping into a viper's nest. Ferdinand's court was a place of suspicion and intrigue, a far cry from the vibrant atmosphere she was used to. She was an intelligent and cultured woman, passionate about the arts, and even founded the Prado Museum, which remains her most enduring legacy. However, she found herself trapped in a marriage with a man who was becoming increasingly erratic and emotionally distant. The pressure to produce an heir was immense, and it took a heavy toll on the young queen. She suffered a miscarriage, which only deepened her melancholy and Ferdinand's impatience. Then, in 1818, during a difficult childbirth, tragedy struck. The baby was stillborn, and the queen herself suffered a catastrophic medical event. Believing she had died, the doctors began preparing for a cesarean section to save the child. It was a horrific ordeal, and it is said that the queen let out a cry of pain as the procedure began, proving she was still alive, but it was too late. She died shortly after. This devastating end sent shockwaves through the court. For Ferdinand, it was another failure, another blow to his fragile ego. His behavior grew even more secretive and unpredictable. He retreated further into himself, his paranoia deepening, and his rule becoming even more arbitrary and violent. The court became a place where whispers in the shadows held more power than official decrees. While Ferdinand was consumed by his personal demons and political purges, his vast overseas empire was slipping through his fingers. The chaos in Spain was a golden opportunity for the colonies in the Americas. Leaders like Simón Bolívar and José de San Martín used Ferdinand's tyranny as powerful propaganda. They painted him as a despotic monster, an enemy of liberty, and a symbol of everything wrong with the old world. How could they remain loyal to a king who persecuted his own people? The independence movements, which had been simmering for years, now exploded into full-blown revolutions. From Mexico to Argentina, cries for freedom echoed across the continent. Ferdinand, obsessed with controlling his subjects in Spain, was powerless to stop the disintegration of his empire. One by one, the colonies declared independence, and the immense wealth that had funded the Spanish crown for centuries was lost forever. Spain, once a global superpower, was reduced to a second-rate European power, a shadow of its former glory. Back in Madrid, the court of Ferdinand VII had degenerated into a bizarre spectacle of paranoia and superstition. The king trusted no one. He employed a vast network of spies, a secret police force known as the Camarilla, who reported on everyone, from high-ranking ministers to common servants. Whispers and denunciations became the currency of power. To navigate this treacherous environment, courtiers resorted to flattery, bribery, and even dabbling in the occult. Superstition was rampant. Ferdinand himself was deeply superstitious, often consulting with mystics and so-called prophets, believing their bizarre rituals could protect him from his enemies and cure his ailments. The atmosphere was suffocating. The political and social life of the nation ground to a halt. Progress was seen as a threat and intellect as a sign of rebellion. This was a kingdom ruled not by reason, but by fear. Ferdinand's reign became synonymous with backwardness and decline, a dark age from which Spain would struggle to recover for generations. In his final years, Ferdinand VII became a recluse, a prisoner of his own palace and his own mind. His physical health, always poor, deteriorated rapidly. He was tormented by gout and a host of other ailments, leaving him in constant pain and further souring his already foul temper. His personal life was a mirror of his political failures. Isolated, paranoid, and unstable. He had married twice more after Maria Isabel's death, finally producing a female heir, Isabella. But even this created a new crisis. Spanish law at the time barred women from the throne. In a desperate bid to secure his daughter's future, Ferdinand changed the law of succession. This act enraged his brother, Carlos, who considered himself the rightful heir. The stage was set for a bloody civil war. When Ferdinand finally died in 1833, Spain did not breathe a sigh of relief. Instead, it plunged directly into the Carlist Wars, a brutal conflict over the throne that would tear the country apart for decades. So, what is the legacy of Ferdinand VII? He is remembered not as El Deseado, but as the felon king. Historians see his life as a tragic perfect storm, the product of centuries of royal inbreeding, compounded by deep psychological trauma from his youth, and then handed absolute, unchecked power. He wasn't just a bad king, he was a catastrophe. He dismantled progress, bankrupted the state, lost an empire, and sowed the seeds of civil war. His reign serves as a chilling reminder of how the personal dysfunctions of a single ruler can inflict unimaginable suffering on an entire nation. It's a story of hope betrayed and a future squandered. A dark chapter in the history of Spain that still echoes to this day. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey into the dark side of history. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of power, madness, and intrigue. Let us know in the comments which monarch's twisted tale you want us to uncover next. Until then, stay curious.